All right, I am back here on the Just End the Suffering podcast, getting ready to break down the college football playoff with my favorite college football guest. He covers the sport for the Sporting News. Bill Bender is back on the podcast. Bill, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Not a problem. I got to say, this is definitely a very interesting year, and conference championship games obviously had a interesting impact on this thing. So you were a guy who saw all this stuff. So what was your big takeaway from that round of games?
It got us the thing that happened that made for the least chaos is the fact that Alabama won. It allowed the picture to clear up, combined with Oklahoma State's loss in the Big Ten or Big 12 championship game. I think those things happened, and then Michigan, Cincinnati, and they closed the door. So I don't think they left room for too much debate in terms of who should or shouldn't be in the playoff.
Yeah, I can't remember the last time that we really had a playoff so clear. There's no debate and somebody screaming, oh, so-and-so got left out. Can you remember when that happened the last time?
Not really. I mean, it was pretty straightforward last year, too. So I think the last 2 years, for all the clamoring for, we need 8 teams, we need this many teams, we need this many teams, to me, all those teams had their chance in the regular season. So proponents of the 4-team and the exclusivity of the playoff got their way this year.
Yeah, for sure. If we went back to when we talked in August and I went back there and told you, I quantum leap back into my body and said, hey, Bill, the playoff field is going to be Alabama, Michigan, Georgia, and Cincinnati. How surprised would you have been?
Pretty surprised. I mean, Alabama and Georgia wouldn't have surprised me because most people sketched out they're both going to go 12-0 and play each other, and the only thing that got in the way of that happening was Texas A&M beating Alabama. But the rest of it, not terribly surprised. Michigan finally got over the hump and beat Ohio State. And then Cincinnati, I knew they'd be good, and you would just figure, I guess the biggest surprise would have been back in August, I would have been really bullish on Clemson just keeping on pace and doing what they've been able to do in the ACC.
Yeah, that's true. And my one question with the rankings, obviously, you're more in Tapas than I am. And when the rankings came out prior to the conference championship games, it was Georgia 1, Michigan 2, Alabama 3. And then when the final one came out, they just flip-flopped Alabama and Georgia, and Michigan stayed at number 2. Do you think that Michigan should have moved up to 1? Or you think Alabama did enough there to justify the leap?
You can make a case for it, but I think Michigan and Alabama profiled very similarly. It was the fact that they both had similar strength of schedules. Alabama's a little bit better. They both had a huge win. Alabama's was a little bit better against Georgia than Michigan's against Ohio State. And they had similar losses. I mean, both really just kind of crumbled in the fourth quarter, whether it was at Texas A&M or Michigan State. So knowing all those things happened, I really didn't I kind of knew that's what they were going to do. So I wasn't surprised on it. But there's definitely a case to be made that Michigan could have been number 1.
Yeah, part of me always wonders that this is not like a computer thing that we have the BCS where we have humans involved. Part of me always sort of wonders, I don't know if you feel this way too, that maybe they sort of we don't want to have the rematch between Alabama and Georgia right away. So we're going to just split them up like we did and just have the two potential for the matchup again, the championship game. Do you think that weighed into it at all?
Maybe a little. I would have been okay if they would have matched them up in the semifinal, but, and now they're both heavy favorites. I mean, that's a huge spread. I can't remember what the spread was against Notre Dame last year. I recall it being pretty high. So I think that's one thing to keep in mind. And then that Georgia-Michigan game is going to be live, though. Either way, I mean, it's going to produce the biggest reaction. That's why they put it in prime time to see if the Wolverines can actually go out there and surprise some people again and maybe go beat a Georgia team that's pretty good.
Yeah, for sure. And I want to start with the Alabama-Cincinnati game, which is really the true David versus Goliath matchup of all the college football playoff games we've ever seen. And right now, we're recording before Christmas here, and as of the date here, Cincinnati, I think, was like a 2-touchdown underdog against Alabama here. Do you give them a shot here in this game, or do you think this is more of like an Alabama's just going to take care of business spot?
I think it's an Alabama's going to take care of business spot. They've won their last 5 semifinals by 20 points per game. A really good team. I mean, so to me, Mike, it's not that different than them going out and beating Notre Dame or Michigan State or Clemson or Washington. I'm trying to get the fifth one in there. Oklahoma, they where they wore all these teams out in the semifinal. They're going to come out focused. Cincinnati's going to play all the stops, man. I mean, Desmond Ritter's built to this moment. Jerome Ford's built to this moment. They've got two good corners on the outside, two All-American caliber corners. So, I mean, they're not going to back down, but they're just up against a lot in Alabama.
Yeah, it's shame. It's not a vintage Alabama team. Cincinnati had a very good year. I mean, they're the first team from outside the Power 5 to make the play. I feel like they kind of deserve a little better than getting potentially steamrolled here.
Well, I mean, it is, but I mean, this is the game for both sides of that argument that has taken place since the college football playoff started. I mean, for a group of 5 opponents, you're in. This is the chance to shine and show and do those things that UCF wanted to do and Houston wanted to do and Boise wanted to do back in the BCS era. And for the elitist types, it's a chance for Alabama to show why Cinderella doesn't belong, and I think they set up the two programs that have best represented that in the college football playoff era to play each other in this game.
Yeah, I wonder how much pressure is on Cincinnati right now to try and make a statement here, show they do belong in this spot, because they sort of have to wave all those other Power 5, non-Power 5 schools you mentioned here. And if they come out and lose 38-10, that's going to be a big thing for all the elitists to say, see, they don't belong here.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, that's why what's at stake. I mean, I don't know that I would take stock in one. It's going to be a tough assignment, and sometimes it becomes a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. We all see Alabama win by a bunch of points and say, I told you so, when the reality is it's one game. There could be a better Cincinnati team come along in a couple of years. Of course, they'll probably be in the Big 12 then. So, I try to keep an open mind with those kind of things.
Yeah, for sure. Let's get to the other game, the Georgia-Michigan matchup here. I think that's definitely the more compelling of the two. As of record date, Georgia's an 8-point favorite in that game. And I think it's a big spot for Michigan here also because Harbaugh, as you mentioned, finally got the monkey off his back to beat Ohio State. What do you think they have to do here to win this game?
Well, they're going to have to run the football. They're going to have to keep Cade McNamara in third manageable. Those are the two big things. And we're going to see. I mean, can Michigan's receivers test Georgia's defensive backs? That's a huge key to this game. Is Michigan's a really good team. They've been able to bully people with that offensive line. Georgia's going to present a challenge with all that 4- and 5-star talent. So, and the creativity factor from Josh Gaddis. That's what blew the Iowa game open. A couple creative plays that Iowa hadn't seen, and all of a sudden Michigan's in control at 14-3. SEC Big Ten games generate a ton of excitement. They generate a ton of interest, and with good reason. So I think that game's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, in terms of if you had to sort of give a percentage here, and obviously recording early because we don't know if there's going to be any sort of COVID issues, somebody gets hurt in practice, but based on what we know of the team today, what percentage chance you give Michigan to win that game?
Well, I mean, I would say it's a 60-40 type game. 65-35 maybe. I mean, they're up against it. It's going to be tough, but that's the game that's going to attract a lot of attention. If they do the things that they did against Ohio State, who has a lot of talent too, they'll be in position to win that game in the second half. If they can slow down Georgia's rushing attack and their defense, man, I mean, Aiden Hutchinson and David Ajabo, if they dominate a game like they will, or they have, especially in the last month of the season, then they're going to have a chance to win the football game.
Oh, for sure. I'm sure that ESPN is definitely rooting for Michigan to win. I feel like they think their rating number probably much bigger if they get Michigan, Alabama than Georgia, Alabama again. I feel like they want to get more national appeal. I think Michigan has that.
Oh, I mean, that ratings would be through the roof on that. I mean, you go back to the Citrus Bowl last year or 2 years ago when they played. It was a highly watched game, and Michigan wasn't near the team they are now. And Alabama had lost 2 games that year. So, yeah, and that was a good game in the first half before Alabama's talent kind of took over. So we'll see what's changed if it comes to that. I still predicted Georgia and Alabama to win. And like you said, I mean, the rest of the country might not be real thrilled about that, but they have been the 2 best teams for most of the year.
Yeah, and assuming we get that all-SEC title game here with the Georgia-Alabama rematch, I think the question I have more is with Georgia because it seems like Alabama's been a mental block for them for years. They can never seem to beat Alabama in a big spot. Is this something you think they have to have in their minds? Sort of we need to find a way to beat this team because we can't get them now when they're not as good as they've been. When's it ever going to happen?
Well, I mean, that's part of football, right? And these long streaks and the emotional blocks that come with it. And certainly they're going to have a chance. they've got to make adjustments from the first game. One of the big things that we've been looking at is obviously John Mechie's out with a torn ACL. If John Mechie can't, he can't play, so Alabama's going to have to adjust to their game plan without him. Alabama, in turn, is going to have to, run the football better in the rematch. So I think those things are certainly at work.
Yeah, for sure. Those games are going to be exciting, but obviously we have a whole other slate of bowls. We got the full slate this year because everything went better with the COVID situation in terms of college football. But, what other bowl games really attract your attention right now? What ones do you make a point to watch besides the 2 playoff games?
Well, there's a lot of them out there. That Western Kentucky Bowl game with the App State, as small as that seems. You get to watch Bailey Zapp toss it around against that App State team that's never lost a bowl game. Any SEC Big Ten game gets a lot of interest. I think Marcus Freeman making his Notre Dame debut is going to be a lot of fun. So there's a lot out there. Michigan State Pitt, Kenneth Walker and Kenny Pickett, 2 of the 2 best stories of the season, going head-to-head in what should be a high-scoring game. So, I'm just happy that we have 43 bowls to watch, and I'll watch most of them. I always do, and it'll be a lot of fun to see.
Absolutely. And last thing I want to touch on here, sorry, this coaching carousel. I think it's been very, very weird this year. We got a lot of big moves. And Lincoln Riley flying out of Oklahoma to go to USC. We had Brian Kelly secretly talking to LSU to become their head coach. The whole Mario Cristobal going to Miami thing was very weird. Which of those moves sort of shocked you the most?
Well, Brian Kelly to LSU. Just because, you thought maybe he would end his career at Notre Dame and to go from one big-time program to another. Lincoln Riley was less surprising maybe because he's younger. It's a lifestyle type thing. He wants to go to the West Coast. He wants to coach USC. It'll be interesting to see how he does. But those are the 2, obviously, that generated the most attention.
Yeah, I think honestly it's interesting seeing how those 2 situations played out where Lincoln Riley sort of gets out of Oklahoma before they go to the SEC, where it's kind of much more difficult. But Brian Kelly said, I'm not scared of a challenge. I'll go to LSU and take on Alabama and Georgia every year.
Yeah. So, all of those things are at work. And, I don't know that Lincoln Riley ducked the SEC necessarily. He just went to what he thought was a better opportunity. And USC, the Pac-12 has been dying to get back on the national stage. Football team, obviously, 2016, they haven't had a playoff team since. So, that conference needs to get going. And then Brian Kelly, obviously, I think he'll be able to recruit a little bit better at LSU. There's no doubt about that. But they're going to expect a national championship. Their last 3 coaches won national championships.
Yeah, I'm fascinated with that, especially considering how quick LSU was willing to move on Matt Orgeron and won the title just 2 years ago.
Well, they had a lot going on off the field, too.
Yeah.
So, with that and, the way that their fans are, they demand, excellence and in recruiting and on the field. And, Brian Kelly's going to have a chance. He's got a chance to prove it. He's going to have to do the same thing that Jimbo's been trying to do at Texas A&M, and everybody has to deal with Alabama. And that kind of brings our conversation full circle in some ways, is whether you're in a 14, 18, 12-team, 16-team playoff, doesn't matter. Everything still revolves around Alabama. Our conversation back in August still revolves around Alabama. Who's going to slow this dynasty down? Who's going to beat this team on the big stage? And how they can go from, not to be too long-winded about it, but how do you go from Mac Jones, Najee Harris, Jalen Waddle, Devontae Smith, all guys that are having success in the NFL, and then you have another Heisman Trophy winner and another supporting cast that is just out of this world.
Yeah, absolutely. I always think, for me, this is my last thing, sort of the 18 playoff thing is going to be the way we end up with this. I wonder if that sort of adding the extra game, even if it is on campus, does add more randomness, more variability to things, and make it more difficult for Alabama to have to win the 3rd game as opposed to just 2. I think that's sort of scenario they can see where we're going. I don't know if we're going to get there. Do you feel like that's coming in, say, the next 5 years?
Yeah, we'll see. Obviously, there's a lot going on, and there's a lot of kinks to work out before we get to the expanded playoff. They will expand. I just don't know when. I think it'll coincide maybe with the next TV deal when realignment's done, and that's what all those decision makers are making. And this year doesn't make it easy on them, because for all the talk about 8 and 12, here we are, and we have the 4 best teams in the country playing in the playoffs.
Yeah, absolutely, Bill. Thanks for all the time. Really appreciate it. Before I let you go, how can people follow on social media, keep up with your coverage of the sporting news?
Yeah, I'm at BillBender92 at sportingnews.com. You can find all our stuff there. And we'll have a ton of playoff stuff over the next couple of weeks. We have our All-American team coming out next week and everything that comes with it.
Absolutely, Bill. Thanks for all the time. Really appreciate it.
Hey, no problem. Thank you.